Arkansas has a way of looking peaceful that its history absolutely does not support. Sitting at the intersection of the country's most dangerous earthquake fault, its most violent tornado corridor, and two of its most flood-prone river systems, this state has been absorbing disasters quietly for over 2 centuries. Massacres, floods, fires, storms, and industrial catastrophes that rarely made national headlines because they happened in a place the national press has always underestimated. Behind the beauty of the Ozarks, the Delta, and the Ouachita Mountains, the natural state has been keeping a ledger of loss that most Americans have never been asked to look at. These are 25 tragedies that demand to be counted. Number 25. The Mississippian civilization vanished before Europeans arrived. When Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto crossed into present-day Arkansas in 1541, he encountered the remnants of the Mississippian culture, a sophisticated civilization that had built mound complexes, organized agricultural systems, and maintained trade networks across the entire eastern continent. The Spanish brought diseases for which no native population in the interior had any immunity, and the epidemic waves that followed first contact moved faster than the explorers themselves, reaching communities the Spanish had not yet visited and destroying them before any European eye witnessed what was being lost. By the time French explorers arrived in Arkansas nearly a century and a half later, they found a landscape that appeared primordial and unoccupied. They were standing in the ruins of a civilization that European contact had erased, and they recorded it as wilderness because no one remained in sufficient numbers to tell them otherwise. Number 24. The New Madrid earthquakes rewrote the Arkansas landscape. Between December 1811 and February 1812, a sequence of earthquakes struck the New Madrid seismic zone, running directly beneath the Arkansas Bootheel at estimated magnitudes between 7.4 and 8.0, making them the largest earthquakes in North American history east of the Rocky Mountains. The ground across northeast Arkansas liquefied and swallowed forests whole. The Mississippi River ran backward for several hours. Church bells rang on their own in cities 1,000 miles away. The earthquakes struck a sparsely populated region, limiting the human death toll, but they permanently rewrote the physical geography of northeast Arkansas in ways the topography of the Bootheel still reflects today. A landscape that looks wrong to trained eyes because an earthquake rearranged it 2 centuries ago, and nothing has put it back. Number 23. The Trail of Tears crossed Arkansas on its way to grief. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 forced the 5 major southeastern native nations from their homelands onto routes that cut directly through Arkansas, the Choctaw, beginning in 1831, followed by the Creek, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Cherokee over the following decade. The routes ran through Arkansas bottomlands, across flooded river crossings, and through winter conditions the federal government had promised to equip the displaced against and failed to. Thousands died on routes passing through the state. The Cherokee called their journey Nun Nadal Tsuni, the trail where they cried. The crying happened in Arkansas, in the bottomlands and river crossings that now carry other names, and the people buried there never came home. Number 22. The Sultana steamboat killed more people than the Titanic. On April 27, 1865, the steamboat Sultana, designed to carry 376 passengers and loaded instead with an estimated 2,400 Union soldiers recently released from Confederate prisoner of war camps, exploded on the Mississippi River approximately 7 miles north of Memphis, in waters adjacent to the Arkansas shoreline. Between 1,700 and 1,800 people died in the explosion, fire, and river in what remains the deadliest maritime disaster in American history, killing more people than the Titanic nearly 5 decades later. The men aboard were soldiers who had survived years of imprisonment, returning home at the end of a war, and they died within days of its conclusion in a river the Arkansas shore flanked on the western side. The disaster received almost no national coverage because it competed with news of Lincoln's assassination, and it has barely received any since. Number 21. Yellow fever emptied the Arkansas Delta in 1878. In the summer and fall of 1878, yellow fever swept up the Mississippi River Valley in the deadliest epidemic in American history, killing an estimated 20,000 people from New Orleans to Memphis and devastating the river towns of Arkansas along the way. Helena, Napoleon, and communities throughout the Delta lost fractions of their populations measured in weeks rather than months. Those who could afford to flee did. Those who could not stayed, and faced a disease whose cause was not yet understood, and whose treatment amounted to prayer and whiskey in roughly equal measure. Several Arkansas river towns never rebuilt to their pre-epidemic size, and the demographic pattern of the Delta was reset by the summer the river brought the fever north in a way that proved permanent. Number 20. The Great Flood of 1927 swallowed the entire Delta. The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, the most destructive river flood in American history, broke levees across the Delta in the spring, inundating 27,000 square miles of the lower Mississippi Valley, with Arkansas absorbing the worst of the destruction. More than 100,000 Arkansans were displaced, the majority of them black sharecroppers confined to relief camps under armed guard and compelled to work rather than leave. A detail that Herbert Hoover, who managed the disaster and rode the positive coverage toward the presidency, worked to keep out of the national press. The 1927 flood permanently altered the Delta's economic and demographic shape, accelerating the northward migration of black Arkansans toward Chicago and Detroit. That migration would reshape American cities for the next 3 decades. Number 19. The Elaine Massacre killed hundreds and called itself a riot. In the fall of 1919, black sharecroppers in Phillips County, organizing a labor union to negotiate fairer cotton prices, were met by white mobs and federal troops who descended on the community of Elaine and killed somewhere between 100 and several hundred black residents over several days. The state recorded it as a riot. 12 black men were sentenced to death in trials lasting minutes in a courthouse surrounded by armed crowds, and 67 received lengthy prison sentences. The Supreme Court overturned the convictions in 1923 in Moore v. Dempsey, establishing critical protections against mob-dominated trials. The Elaine Massacre carried more deaths than most events that fill chapters in American history textbooks, and remains largely absent from them. Before we continue, if Arkansas's history of hidden catastrophe is hitting differently than you expected, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It helps us keep uncovering the stories every state has been carrying in silence. Number 18. Civil War reduced Arkansas to rubble and starvation. Arkansas was among the most devastated states of the Confederacy when the Civil War concluded, with 4 years of conflict fought directly across its soil, leaving the state in a condition that contemporaries described not as defeated, but as destroyed. Farms were burned, livestock was consumed by armies moving through, and the agricultural infrastructure of both the Delta and the river valleys had been dismantled to a degree that left the civilian population facing starvation in the war's final years and immediate aftermath. An estimated 12,000 to 15,000 Arkansas soldiers died in Confederate service, and an additional 9,000 black Arkansans who served in Union forces contributed their own casualties to a death toll that proportionally ranked among the highest in the country. Arkansas entered Reconstruction, having lost both the system it fought for and the prosperity it had generated, in a landscape that would take generations to recover. Number 17. Western Arkansas coal mines extracted lives along with coal. The coal fields of the Arkansas River Valley, concentrated in Sebastian and Johnson counties in the western part of the state, operated from the 1870s through the mid-20th century and produced coal that powered regional industry while generating a parallel record of explosions, cave-ins, gas ignitions, and cumulative lung disease that operators were under limited regulatory pressure to prevent. Mine disasters in the coalfields killed workers in numbers that filled local newspapers without reaching national ones, at a pace the industry classified as an acceptable cost of extraction, and the miners' families experienced as something else entirely. The Johnson County mines recorded multiple fatalities across their operating decades, in a community where most adult men worked underground, and the odds of dying there were understood as part of the terms of employment. The coal ran out before the regulatory framework arrived that might have made what remained of the work survivable. Number 16. The 1952 tornado outbreak leveled Judsonia and beyond. On March 21, 1952, a major tornado outbreak swept across the Mid-South, and an F5 tornado struck the small town of Judsonia in White County with a ferocity that left almost nothing standing. Approximately 100 people died across Arkansas in the outbreak, with Judsonia absorbing the single most catastrophic blow, a proportional death toll amounting to a significant fraction of everyone within the town's boundaries. Photographs taken in the aftermath showed foundations where houses had stood, empty lots where neighborhoods had existed, and a landscape of cleared debris that looked deliberate rather than meteorological. Judsonia rebuilt slowly, in the way small towns rebuild when the people who remember what it looked like before are among those who did not survive it. Number 15. The 1974 super outbreak struck before Arkansas was ready. On April 3rd and 4th, 1974, the largest tornado outbreak in recorded history at that time swept across 13 states in 16 hours, spawning 148 confirmed tornadoes and killing more than 300 people, with Arkansas lying directly in its path. Multiple tornadoes cut through communities across the state in rapid succession, arriving faster than the warning systems of 1974 could track, in a year when Doppler radar was experimental rather than operational. Communities absorbed damage from successive storms before the assessment of the previous one was complete, and the speed of the outbreak made meaningful preparation impossible for anyone in its path. The 1974 outbreak was the direct catalyst for the National Weather Service's investment in the Doppler radar network that became operational in the 1990s. Warning infrastructure built on the foundation of a death toll that demonstrated beyond any bureaucratic argument what the absence of it cost. Number 14. The Guy earthquake swarm revealed a danger Arkansas created itself. Beginning in 2010 and intensifying through 2011, the small town of Guy in Faulkner County became the center of an earthquake swarm, hundreds of small earthquakes occurring with a frequency the region had not recorded in its geological history, that researchers linked to the injection of wastewater from natural gas operations into deep disposal wells beneath the Arkansas Ozarks. Arkansas was, without intending to, manufacturing its own seismic activity in a state already sitting above one of the most dangerous natural fault systems in North America. The state issued a moratorium on new disposal wells in the most affected areas in 2011, and seismic activity decreased following the operational changes. The Guy swarm demonstrated with unusual clarity that the combination of natural and industrial seismic hazard beneath Arkansas is one that geologists have not stopped monitoring since. Number 13. The 1997 Arkadelphia tornado struck on a quiet Sunday morning. On March 1, 1997, an F3 tornado struck Arkadelphia in Clark County on an early spring Sunday morning, killing several residents and causing catastrophic structural damage across a community home to 2 universities and roughly 10,000 people. University buildings lost roofs and walls, and downtown structures that had survived decades of weather were stripped or collapsed entirely. The timing, a Sunday morning when most people were home or at church rather than crossing campus, almost certainly prevented the death toll from matching the scale of the structural destruction. The disaster revealed the particular fragility of small college towns to events that damage not just buildings, but the institutional anchors that define the community's economic identity in the years that follow. Number 12. The 1998 Westside shooting shocked the country before it was ready. On March 24, 1998, Mitchell Johnson, 13, and Andrew Golden, 11, pulled a fire alarm at Westside Middle School in Jonesboro, then waited with rifles outside as students and teachers evacuated into the open, killing 4 students and 1 teacher and wounding 10 others. The country received the news with the particular horror of an event it had not yet built a category for. In a year before, Columbine provided the framework around which the national conversation about school violence would eventually organize itself. Both perpetrators, tried as juveniles under Arkansas law, were released when they turned 21. Jonesboro held what could not be released: the grief of a community that watched the national conversation move on while remaining in the place where it happened. Number 11. Ice storms in 2000 and 2009 paralyzed Arkansas twice over. Arkansas experienced 2 of the most destructive ice storms in state history within 9 years. A major ice event in December 2000 followed by a catastrophic repeat in late January 2009 that exceeded it in nearly every measurable category. The 2009 storm coated trees, power lines, and roads under more than an inch of ice, snapping utility poles, collapsing lines, and toppling trees that had stood for generations in numbers that overwhelmed every available utility crew simultaneously. More than 500,000 Arkansas households lost power at the peak, with rural customers in northwest and north-central Arkansas waiting 3 to 4 weeks for restoration. The 2009 storm remains the benchmark against which every subsequent Arkansas winter weather event is measured, and it is a benchmark that has not been approached since. Number 10. The Albert Pike campground flood killed families in the dark. Shortly after midnight on June 11, 2010, A thunderstorm dropped several inches of rain onto the watershed above the Albert Pike recreation area in the Ouachita National Forest, and the Little Missouri River rose approximately 23 feet in hours, sweeping through a campground in total darkness while families slept along its banks. 20 people died, including children who had camped at Albert Pike before without incident, which is the specific cruelty of flash flooding in the Ouachita Mountains, where the same location can be idyllic one evening and lethal before dawn. A flash flood watch had been issued for the region, but the warning did not reach people asleep on a riverbank in a national forest in time to matter. The Albert Pike disaster changed campground protocols across the Ouachita National Forest and raised questions about public notification systems in remote recreation areas that took years to answer inadequately. Number 9. The Tucker Prison Farm became a chamber of systematic torture. For decades beginning in the 1930s and continuing well into the 1960s, the Tucker State Prison Farm in Jefferson County operated as one of the most brutal correctional institutions in American history, where inmates, the majority of them black, were subjected to systematic torture, including electric shock applied to genitals with a device guards called the Tucker telephone, whipping with leather straps, and forced labor in conditions that produced deaths the institution recorded with the paperwork of routine administration. A 1966 investigation by newly appointed prison superintendent Tom Merton unearthed skeletal remains of inmates in unmarked graves on the prison grounds, bringing national attention to conditions the state of Arkansas had been aware of and chose not to address for generations. Governor Winthrop Rockefeller initiated reforms, and Merton was eventually fired for his disclosures. The Tucker Prison Farm was not an aberration. It was an institution operating exactly as the system that built it intended, for exactly as long as outside scrutiny allowed it to continue. Number 8. The Mayflower pipeline spill flowed through a neighborhood. On March 29, 2013, a section of ExxonMobil's Pegasus pipeline running beneath the Northwood subdivision in Mayflower ruptured, releasing approximately 210,000 gallons of Wabasca heavy crude oil directly into a residential neighborhood, where it flowed down suburban streets, into storm drains, and toward Lake Conway, one of the most productive sport fishing lakes in Arkansas. 22 homes were evacuated, and children played near the contamination before residents fully understood what was moving through their neighborhood. ExxonMobil paid fines and conducted cleanup operations measured in months, while long-term health monitoring of affected residents received a fraction of the institutional attention that the immediate visible remediation generated. That disparity between visible cleanup and invisible health consequence is the standard pattern following pipeline failures in residential areas, and the people of Northwoods experienced it not as a pattern, but as a specific and ongoing injury. Number 7. The Valonia and Mayflower tornadoes returned to already broken ground. On April 27, 2014, an EF4 tornado with winds exceeding 170 miles per hour tore through Valonia and Mayflower in central Arkansas, striking communities that had sustained tornado damage just 2 years earlier and had not yet completed recovery from that event. 16 people died, more than 200 were injured, and the tornado reduced subdivisions north of Little Rock to concrete foundations while destroying homes built to modern construction codes as readily as older structures. The psychological toll of a repeat strike, a second disaster arriving in a community still rebuilding from the first, was documented by mental health workers who described trauma layered on unhealed trauma in a population that had not yet finished grieving what the previous storm took. Number 6. Arkansas Nuclear One's crane collapse sent shockwaves through the industry. On March 31, 2013, a massive overhead crane collapsed inside the Unit 1 reactor building at Arkansas Nuclear One near Russellville during a planned outage, dropping a 525-ton generator stator onto the reactor building floor in an accident that killed one worker instantly, injured 8 others, and triggered the largest earthquake-equivalent ground shock ever recorded at a nuclear facility in the United States. The event forced a shutdown of both units at the plant and triggered investigations by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that scrutinized both the accident itself and the safety culture at the facility that preceded it. Enterprise, the plant's operator, paid fines and conducted an extensive internal review, while the NRC's findings about communication failures and procedural shortcuts painted a portrait of systemic vulnerability that went beyond the mechanical failure of a single crane. Arkansas Nuclear One provides roughly 30% of Arkansas's electricity, and sits upstream of communities along the Arkansas River whose emergency planning documents were tested in theory by the 2013 event in ways that raised more questions than they settled. Number 5. The Tucker prison torture legacy haunted Arkansas's criminal justice system. The systematic abuses documented at Tucker and the Cummins Prison Farm, the two primary Arkansas state penal institutions operating through most of the 20th century, prompted a landmark federal lawsuit that in 1970 produced a ruling by Judge J. Smith Henley declaring the entire Arkansas prison system unconstitutional as a violation of the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. The case, Holt v. Sarver, established a legal precedent that prison conditions themselves, not merely individual acts of abuse, could constitute constitutional violations, reshaping correctional law across the country. Arkansas's prisons remained under federal oversight for years following the ruling, a supervision that documented ongoing deficiencies even after the most overt tortures had been stopped. The institutional culture documented in Arkansas's penal system through those decades was not unique, but Arkansas became the state where the federal judiciary forced the national reckoning with it into the open. Number 4. A heat wave in 1980 killed hundreds of Arkansans in silence. The summer of 1980 delivered one of the most devastating heat events in Arkansas history, as part of a broader Southern Plains heat wave that killed an estimated 1,700 people across the region. With Arkansas among the hardest-hit states, its death toll concentrated among elderly residents in rural areas without air conditioning and in agricultural workers with no shelter from temperatures that exceeded 100 degrees for weeks. The drought that accompanied the heat destroyed crops across the state in what became the costliest weather disaster in American history up to that point, with agricultural losses in Arkansas alone running into the hundreds of millions. Unlike tornadoes and floods, which produce visible and photogenic destruction, heat kills quietly and individually, in homes, in fields, in the particular invisibility of suffering that happens behind closed doors and is recorded in mortality statistics months after the event. Arkansas's 1980 heat deaths were counted but never mourned collectively, which is the particular tragedy of a disaster that kills without leaving wreckage for anyone to photograph. Number 3. The opioid crisis dismantled rural Arkansas one community at a time. Arkansas recorded some of the highest opioid prescription rates in the United States throughout the 2000s and 2010s, with pharmaceutical distributors flooding rural counties with quantities of oxycodone and hydrocodone that bore no relationship to legitimate medical need, and every relationship to the profit margins of companies that targeted economically distressed regions with limited healthcare infrastructure and even more limited regulatory oversight. The overdose death rate in Arkansas climbed year after year, concentrated in rural counties across the Ozarks and the Delta, where economic decline, the collapse of manufacturing employment, and chronic underfunding of mental health services had created the precise conditions that addiction fills. The communities that lost the most people were often the same ones that had already lost their hospitals, their industries, and the young residents who had left for cities, adding an opioid death toll to a list of losses that had been accumulating for decades. The pharmaceutical companies whose distribution practices fueled the crisis reached settlements with states across the country. The people in Crawford County and Izard County and Lee County who died in the years those settlements were being negotiated were not part of any agreement. Number 2. A nuclear missile exploded in an Arkansas cornfield. On September 18, 1980, an Air Force maintenance worker dropped a socket wrench inside a Titan II missile silo near Damascus in Van Buren County. A tool that fell 70 feet, bounced off a thrust mount, and punctured the rocket's fuel tank, triggering a vapor leak that ignited 8 hours later in an explosion that blew the 740-ton silo door 200 feet into the air, killed Air Force Specialist David Livingston, injured 21 others, and hurled the missile's 9-megaton nuclear warhead, the most powerful in the American arsenal, 600 times stronger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, into a nearby ditch 300 yards from the silo. The warhead did not detonate, separated from its classified arming mechanism by a safety system that worked exactly as designed in conditions it had never been tested against in practice. The Air Force recovered the warhead from an Arkansas field and classified the incident details for years. Damascus, Arkansas came within a single safety mechanism of becoming the site of the largest accidental nuclear detonation in human history, and most Arkansans and most Americans have never heard its name in that context. Number 1. Arkansas absorbs its disasters in the quiet of a state America underestimates. The most defining fact about tragedy in Arkansas is the silence surrounding it. The systematic way that remoteness, poverty, and the state's complicated racial history have made it easy for the rest of the country to look past what has happened here. The Elaine massacre killed more people than most events taught in American classrooms and appears in fewer of them. The Sultana killed more people than the Titanic and received a fraction of a percent of the historical attention. The New Madrid earthquakes remain the largest seismic event in Eastern American history and are remembered primarily by the people who live above the fault that caused them. Arkansas has been producing disasters of historic scale in a place the country has always found easy to look past, and the result is a ledger of loss the state has been carrying largely alone. In river towns, Delta farmland, Ozark hollows, prison farms, and earthquake country, where the ground has moved before and is waiting without any particular urgency to move again. Now that you know these 25 tragedies and natural disasters that have shaped Arkansas, tell us which one surprised you the most. Drop it in the comments, and let's keep uncovering the hidden history of every American state together. Let me know which state I should cover next. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.